Hello, I'm a Christ follower.
And I'm a Christian.
What you got there?
Oh, just catching up on some reading. Got some rule books, ethics manuals, and a morality play or two just for good measure.
That's a lot of reading.
Yeah, and right on top I've got my trusty sword. King James version. Neatly packaged inside this leather bag.
I like the handles.
Oh, they're handy. Do you want to see my bumper sticker collection?
Sure.
I ran out of room on my car.
Wow, those are clever.
Thanks. So what do you wear to display your Christianity?
Well, nothing, I guess. I don't know, I just try to follow Christ in the way I live my life. I don't feel like I have to wear my heart on my sleeve, as it were.
I have to wear my heart on my sleeve, as it were.
Are you mocking me?
Are you mocking me?
Cut it out.
Cut it out.
I'm a big dork.
I'm a big dork. Oh.
Well, so this morning we are starting a new series. And for the next 5 weeks, I want to get right down to the core of our faith. And I want us to think about how simple and how beautiful it really is. And the reason that this is so important is that it's so easy to get off track. So easy to get fuzzy about what it is that we're doing, what this is all about. It's so easy to make the Christian faith about something that it isn't. Like to invent and sort of pursue some counterfeit version of it. And so this morning, I want us to kind of start by thinking about a particular counterfeit version that's very popular for people to follow. And we could call it Jesus Says. Now, you've all played Simon Says, right? Yes? Really? Are there some of you that don't know Simon Says? Okay, you've all played Simon Says. You know how this goes. You know, Simon says, touch your head. You know, Simon says, raise your arm. Simon says, turn around. Jump 3 times. Uh-oh. Simon didn't say. Okay, you're out, right? And sometimes people start treating Christianity like it's a giant game of Jesus says. You know, Jesus says jump. Jesus says go to church. Jesus says pray. Jesus didn't say to look over there. Oh man, but have you seen her? You know? And if you do something that Jesus didn't say, then you're out. Now, some of you grew up playing Jesus Says. And it's so hollow and it's so lifeless. And a lot of times, to be honest, it makes you a jerk. I mean, when you're trying hard to play the game, it's so tempting to judge people that aren't playing, right? I mean, it's like, look, you're not doing what Jesus says. You're not playing right. You need to play the game. You need to do what Jesus says because, like, if I'm going to be miserable, you need to be miserable. And this Jesus Says game brings out all of this really weird stuff in people. Like, the better we do at it, the more judgmental we are. And yet at the same time, there's like this underlying jealousy. Like, uh-oh, I think they're having more fun. Like, look at all this stuff that they get to do that I can't. And of course, if we're trying to play Jesus Says, and it's not going very well, we're on the other end of this deal, then there's all this insecurity, and there's all this inadequacy, and there's all this shame associated with it. This is like, you know, I'm not a very good person. Like, I'm not very good at religion. Like, God must be really disappointed with me. God must be angry with me. He must hate me. And so the reality of this is that, like, whether we're good at it or not, playing this Jesus Says game leads to problems. Now, some of you, you know, like, you've never played. Because you've looked around and you've seen all the other people playing the game, and you're like, you know what, if that's religion, why in the world would I ever want that? And that is an intelligent question. You've seen the judgment, and you've seen the condemnation, and you've seen the shame that people deal with. And so very reasonably, you've looked at all of that and you've said, no, thank you. Others of you, you've spent serious time playing the Jesus Says game. maybe years. Like maybe it was the church environment that you grew up in. Maybe it's the way your parents did it. Maybe it's the way that your friends went about pursuing their faith. But whatever it was that led you to it, you tried to play. But for whatever reason, eventually you gave up on it. And maybe it's because you weren't very good at it. Or maybe it's just because it didn't seem very fun to play anymore. And so at some point you just said, you know what, the heck with it. Like, I'm out. And like, if I go to hell, at least I'll know people there. You know, because I just can't do this. I'm out. I'm done. Okay, I'm through with this. I'm not doing it anymore. Okay, now here's the good news. If you could like somehow erase your memory banks of everything that you've ever heard about God or Jesus or the Bible or religion, if you could just like wipe the hard drive and start over, and you just started with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, okay, the four Gospels, the 4 books that tell us the story of Jesus, here's what would be gripping, okay, here's what would overwhelm you. The essence of this whole deal is relational. Like when Jesus taught about spirituality, it was all about relationship. And he used a ton of different metaphors to communicate this and express this. He talked about it being like a father and a child. Jesus said we can think of God like our Father. You know, not some like reflection of an imperfect human father, but like this ideal, loving, caring Father. So it's relational. Or he described it as being like a sheep and a shepherd. Now in the first century, okay, this was a powerful image. Now for us, this is kind of a bad illustration. Because really, when is the last time you watched a shepherd with a sheep? And you just thought, wow, that's amazing. Okay, but Jesus' audience, they got this. Like they knew a shepherd cares for the sheep. He protects the flock from wolves or lions or predators of all different kinds. He leads them to safety where they can graze and live and be in community without fear. And if one of them wanders off, then he goes after that one and he brings it back and he puts it back in the flock where it can be a part of things and it can be safe and it can be in the pasture again. And the sheep trust the shepherd. They knew this. They saw it every day. They follow the shepherd. One time Jesus said, I'm like the shepherd, and my sheep, they know me. They know my voice. They recognize it. And when I call them, they come to me. And then there's a third picture that he used. This relationship between a vine and a branch. And Jesus said it's like this. It's like I'm the vine and you're the branch. Now the vine doesn't say, like, hey branch, do this and do that. It's more about the vine pouring life into the branch. Because a branch that stays connected to the vine, the life just flows directly from the vine right into the branch. And Jesus says, you know, that's what I want to do with you. Somehow learn to stay connected to me and let me pour my life into you. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, but I get it. It's relational. But honestly, how do you have a relationship with an invisible God? Well, we're going to talk a whole lot about that in the coming weeks, because that really is the million-dollar question, right? But for today, I want to kick this off by thinking about a very simple idea. Something that we can all do, a simple decision that we can all make. And it's what Jesus said is at the very center, at the very core of all of it. We're going to start today by looking at a word that Jesus used over and over. It's a word that we're going to sort of camp out on in this series, and it's simply the word follow. Like that's it. Follow. And this is amazing, because when you think about it, Jesus extended an invitation to follow to like every kind of person imaginable, to spiritual people and unspiritual people, to religious people and irreligious people, to rich people, to poor people. And he would just look around and he would see somebody and he'd just say, come on, follow. Yeah, hey, you over there. And people are like, me? And he's like, yeah, you. Come on, follow. Okay, now today what we're going to do is we're going to spend our time looking at a very famous account of this. And this is a great story. Like, people love this story. In fact, like, if you're kind of new to the Bible, you're going to love this story. And if you're kind of like an anti-religious person and you're sitting here thinking, what am I even doing in a church or in a school or whatever this is, you're going to love this story. This is an awesome story. Okay, here's how it starts. This is Matthew chapter 9, starting with verse 9. And it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Okay, so Jesus and his disciples are making their way, and they stumble upon Matthew, the tax collector. Now, in our culture, IRS people aren't really that popular. I mean, can we be honest? I mean, if you're an IRS person, you know, Jesus loves you. But they're just not that popular. Okay, but in Jesus' culture, tax collectors were like hated. They were hated. It's hard for us to even get our minds around how much they were hated. And here's why. Tax collectors were Jewish men, at least in Israel they were. They were Jewish men, and they were Israelites that had agreed to work for Rome. Okay, and the Romans occupied Israel, and they ruled it brutally. And they were taxing the Israelites to the point of starvation. Like, many people had lost their land, and they had lost their homes, and they had lost everything. And sometimes they would even, I've tried to get your mind around this, they would even sell their own children into slavery. Like, if they couldn't feed their kids, and if they couldn't feed themselves, and they had debts that they couldn't pay. Okay, there was no bankruptcy in their system. Okay, this was the only way to sell your children into slavery. Now, can you imagine that? And all of this was a direct result of the way Rome was oppressing Israel. In fact, all of the places that it colonized. So these Jewish men collected taxes for Rome from their own people, their own brothers and sisters. And very often, they would then add on, like, to these already unbearable taxes, they added on their own fees, these little surcharges to pad their own pockets. And the Romans allowed them to do this. This was all legal. There would be a tax collector, and there would be all these Roman soldiers there making sure that he was able to collect everything he was trying to collect, just backing him up. I mean, it was totally corrupt. But there was nothing that people could do. They were absolutely helpless. Now, you think about this and you go, like, what could we even compare this to in our own culture? Like, in our own day, who would be willing to ruin people's lives to make money? Like, who would make it so that people are losing their children? Well, maybe we could imagine, like, a drug dealer, like a drug lord. You know, a man trying to get as many 12 to 14-year-olds as possible addicted to crack. Turning kids with futures into addicts and into prostitutes. Okay, now we're getting a little closer to what this represented for them. And so you and I, we hear tax collector and we think, well, yeah, I'm not that crazy about the IRS either. It ran so much deeper than that. And everybody knew, everybody in that region of the world knew, not only have these tax collectors turned their back on their people, they've turned their back on the God of justice and mercy. These are the most godless men on the planet. And they weren't allowed in the synagogue, and they weren't allowed to go to the temple. So here's Jesus, and he's on a walk with a few disciples, and they stumble upon Matthew at his tax collector's booth, probably with some Roman soldiers around him. Now, Jesus could have walked up to him, and you think about this. Jesus could have walked up to him and said all kinds of things. I mean, he could have looked at him and gone, yeah, I'm sure your mother's really proud. Or way worse. Like, he could have just lit into Matthew. He could have said, like, what are you thinking, you heartless weasel? But you look at what Jesus said. Here's this encounter. Jesus is with the disciples. They're trying to learn from him. And here's what Jesus says, Matthew chapter 9, the rest of verse 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in a tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now understand, when Jesus issued this invitation, it wasn't like to walk around with Jesus for the day. This was an invitation to be a part of Jesus' inner circle, like one of his guys, one of his disciples. And so if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, like, that's just crazy, you're not alone. I mean, the religious people standing around watching this were going nuts. And it doesn't tell us, but I would imagine the disciples were too. They're like, Jesus, are you crazy? The religious guys are going, you can't just do that. A tax collector? Like after everything he's done, he just can't go from tax collector 1 minute to disciple the next minute. And so if you're looking at this story and you're going, this is just way too simple, you're not alone. But Jesus had this way of making things really simple. And again, it's so interesting what Jesus doesn't say in this interaction. You know, he doesn't come along, he doesn't grab Matthew, and he doesn't say, hey, if you're willing to, and then fill in the blank, you can follow me. Like he doesn't say, if you're willing to stop whatever, you can follow me. If you're willing to start doing these things, you can follow me. If you're willing to give up this thing, you can follow me. If you're willing to change this stuff in your life, you can follow me. He doesn't say, okay, I'm going to give you a little assignment, and then, I'm going to check back with you in 3 months, and if you're doing really good and you've been able to check all of these boxes, then you can follow me. He simply says, hey, follow me. Matthew's like, me? Like, yeah. Like right now? Yeah. Follow me. And so Matthew, you have to imagine this moment. He slides his chair back, he stands up, and he follows Jesus. Now, where would you imagine that they might go next? What would you think that they might do next? I mean, maybe you'd imagine this little scenario and you go, well, he's probably going to follow Jesus to a little Bible study. Or maybe they're going to go to the temple and Jesus is just going to sit with Matthew and they're going to pray and they're going to spend hours and pray and ask for God's grace and just spend some time. Or maybe Jesus would lead him to like some private area and Matthew's family would be waiting there to have an intervention. And when he gets there, they'd go on and on and on about how Matthew had hurt them and how he had shamed their family and all the things that he had done to destroy their family. And everybody there would do their best to convince Matthew to change his life and to get himself cleaned up and to get it together. But it doesn't go like that. Like it doesn't go like that at all. I mean, look at verse 10. So Matthew gets up and follows him. Next thing. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Like, so they don't go to a Bible study. They don't go to a prayer meeting. They don't go to the temple. They don't go to the synagogue. They go over to a party at Matthew's house. And guess who Matthew invited to this party? Like he invited people that would come. Like the only people that he knew that would come. People that had had such a good time at his last party, like as much as they could remember of it, and they were filled in with the rest of it. They put all that together and they decided, you know what? It's really fun over at Matthew's house. And so here they are. Now, like you have to imagine this whole thing for the disciples. They're in shock. Like John and James and Peter. This whole thing's going down and they're like, what? Are you kidding? We're going to this tax collector's guy's house to hang out with his tax collector buddies? Jesus, have you lost your mind? I mean, there's going to be a lot of 4-letter words used over there. And these guys, they don't like drink moderately. They don't just like nurse a glass of Guinness. Like These guys are doing keg stands with Bud Light. Like, do you understand what's going on? And do you know how this is going to look, Jesus? This is what this is going to do for your reputation and our reputation? Besides that, this guy is like ceremonially unclean. He can't even get into the outer court of the temple. Like, we're going to get contaminated. Like, we're going to get tax collector ickiness on us. His sin is going to get us. Like, we can't go to this guy's house. And Jesus just looks at him and says, hey, if you want to keep following me, I'm going to Matthew's place. Like, I'm going to a party. And so they go. Now, let's just pause for a second. For some of you, maybe this sort of casual picture of Jesus seems odd. Like, maybe you have a hard time imagining Jesus saying to you, hey, would you follow me? And I'm not asking you to change anything or clean yourself up or get everything together. I'm just asking you to follow me. And let's start by going someplace that you're comfortable. Maybe that picture and that idea seems like the opposite of everything that you've ever experienced. Like the churches and the Christians that you've known. They don't think like that. And so maybe this picture of Jesus is really strange to you. And maybe you don't necessarily believe that any of this really even happened. But part of the reason that you just sort of put off God and Jesus is because of your interactions with religious people. Like, you've just had a very different picture of Jesus presented to you. And again, if this seems like way too casual for you, you're not the first. Okay, this seemed way, way too casual to the religious people that were watching this. And they were floored when they saw what Jesus was doing, because apparently they followed Jesus to this party. And they stood outside watching, like criticizing. Look at verse 11. It says, when the Pharisees saw this, okay, they're outside the party now. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Now, the Pharisees, for those of you that don't know, were like the religious leaders in their community. They were the religious elite. They studied and they taught the Torah. Their job was to be holy and to teach others to do the same. And they played a prominent role in the life of Jewish people. So the Pharisees followed Jesus and his disciples to this party, and they are totally confused by what they see happening. And so they're starting to murmur outside. They're watching this. And they're like, what in the world is going on in there? I mean, if Jesus is from God, and we've seen the miracles and so much of what he teaches makes so much sense, if Jesus is from God, then why is he hanging out with people like that? And he should be hanging out with us. I mean, we're the cool kids. We follow all the rules. We're the ones that are getting it all right. Like, what's Jesus doing hanging out with them? These guys have like fallen off the cliff. They're not on the edge of the cliff. They have fallen off. They're gone. I mean, not only are they sinners, but they do it right out in the open, right in God's face in front of everyone. But there's Jesus hanging out with these scumbags. And you know what's really weird? And they're just watching as Jesus is sitting and eating and hanging out with these guys. You know what's really weird? It seems like they like him. I mean, look at them. Look at them in there. They're like laughing and they're joking and everybody looks comfortable. They're like slapping each other on the back. And you know what's even weirder? It looks like he likes them. And so they ask the disciples, or they start murmuring very loudly, hey, how come your teacher associates with the scum of the earth? And what does that say about him? And what does that say about you guys? And so somehow Jesus hears the question and he responds. Verses 12 to 13. On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So Jesus is sitting at this table with all these tax collectors. Again, I mean, you imagine the Pope sitting at a table with drug lords. And here he is with all these sinners. And they're having a great time. And they're talking to Jesus. And they like him. And he likes them. But there's all this chatter outside. All this criticism that's being thrown at them from the Pharisees. And so apparently, he just kind of says this real loud, I guess. So that like even the people outside could hear. Maybe he's pretending to talk to the people at the table, but he's kind of directing it to the people outside. And he says, hey, listen. It's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. Okay, I haven't come to call the righteous, but sinners. And we listen to that and we go, oh, that's beautiful. Jesus. Okay, but get your mind around the context. Imagine that you're one of those tax collectors around the table with Jesus. I mean, think about like Matthew. Wait a minute, Jesus. You're like a guest in my house. Did you really just say that about me and my friends? Okay, like I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I think I get it. You're saying that they're healthy out there and we're sick in here. And you're not out there with them because they're healthy and they don't need you, but me and all of my friends, are you calling us sick? Now, we don't know exactly how this went down. It doesn't really tell us. But I'm guessing that Jesus maybe just smiled and said, Matthew, you're a tax collector. Of course you're sick. And look at your friends here. And they're all sitting around the table and they're like, yeah, we're pretty sick. And they're all high-fiving each other and they just continue on with the dinner. Because this is a group of people that had no illusions about being spiritually healthy. These were people that knew that they were in need. And they weren't ashamed to say so. Like this was all out in the open. They were sick and they knew they were sick. They were broken and they knew they were broken. They needed to be healed and they knew they needed to be healed. So here's what Jesus is saying. Saying something like, okay, listen, let me tell you why I'm here. Let me tell you why I've come. I'm here for people who in their very, very honest moments know that there's something wrong. I'm extending an invitation to people to follow me. People who would look in the mirror and say, you know, nobody else maybe knows it, but there's something wrong. I'm extending this invitation to people who have a habit, and they've done everything that they can think of to save themselves from the habit, and they can't save themselves from it, and they need saving. I'm here for people who know in their heart and their soul that something's wrong. People who can honestly say, look, I'm sick. Something's not right. I've got a problem, and I know there's a problem. I'm here for the addicted person. I'm here for the married couple that's had a tough go and done everything that they know to fix it, and they can't fix it. People who in an honest moment would say, look, our marriage is sick. People who would be willing to say, my relationship with my kids is sick. People who would be willing to say, there is a sense of longing in me for something more, but I don't know where to find it. I've tried everything I know to do, and I can't find it anywhere. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you there's something in my spirit that's sick. I'm here for people who would say, I feel incredibly guilty about something in my life, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to make it right. I'm here for people who would say, I want to be different. People who would say, something in me is wrong. Something needs to be fixed. I'm sick, and I need someone or I need something to heal me. And Jesus says to the Pharisees, in this one little statement, these people who think they've gotten it all right. He says, I'm not here for people who don't think there's a problem. I'm not here for people who think that everything's just fine. I'm here for people who know better. Now, Jesus wasn't saying like the Pharisees were actually healthy. He's just telling them that they're utterly blind to how sick they are. And in other places, he tells them things like, he's like, you guys are so meticulous about following the rules down to the smallest details, but you're missing the whole point. You have no heart. Like there's no love, there's no compassion, there's no mercy, there's no humility. And so I want to give you a new heart. I want to heal you, but you won't come to me. You refuse to follow. And see, for Jesus, it wasn't enough to have people believe right and to have people behave right. Because for people that only care about having the right beliefs and having the right behavior, they eventually become Pharisees. They become judgmental. They become critical. They become ashamed. And they become church people. They become church people that say, hey, as soon as you change, you can be part of us. In fact, that was the whole Pharisee message to the world. Change, and you can join us. But Jesus came along, and he turned everything upside down. He messed everybody up, and Jesus came along, and Jesus said, hey, join us, like just as you are. Join us, and you will change. Matthew, I'm not asking you to do anything in this moment except stand up and follow me, and we're just going to go to your house. We're going to eat. We're going to drink some wine. And the Pharisees are going, well, but Jesus, he's a tax collector. And Jesus is like, look, I don't run your game plan. Your game plan is believe the right stuff, behave the right way. Like we'll give you a quiz in a few months, and if you get it all right, then you can join us. Jesus says, no. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what you believe or what you don't believe about me or anything else in this moment. I just want to invite you to take a little baby step and follow me. But let me warn you. If you follow me for very long, one of these days, you're going to look in the mirror and you're not going to recognize the person that's looking back at you. And it's not because you've been in some endless game of Jesus says. It's because I'm like a vine and you're like a branch. And if you stay connected to me, I will pour my life into you. And so I'm just inviting you. Follow me. And so that's what this series is about. Like regardless of where you are in your life, regardless of where you are on the spiritual spectrum, and maybe you've been a Christian for a long time and you could spit out all the right answers and you could quote scriptures like the back of your hand, or maybe you're in a spot where you're like, I couldn't tell you the first thing about the Bible. I couldn't tell you the first thing about anything having to do with Christianity. It doesn't matter where on the spectrum you are. Jesus is saying the same thing to you. He's simply saying, follow me. So I want to wrap this thing up this morning with 3 quick observations about following Jesus. Number 1, being a sinner doesn't disqualify you. It's a prerequisite. It's like, here's the deal. It was the sick people that followed Jesus. Like the people that thought they were perfect, they were the biggest enemies of Jesus. They were his biggest opposition. But the more people were aware of their own spiritual need, the more willing they were to come to Jesus. Like Matthew, he is on the far end of the spectrum. He's a wicked man. He's a mess. But Jesus begins with Matthew right where he is. Like before Matthew has prayed anything, before Matthew has committed anything, before Matthew has changed anything. Jesus just says, look, Matthew, just as you are, would you take a baby step and would you follow me? And I'm going to make it easy. The very first place we'll go is your house. You should be comfortable there. So just invite your friends. Let's have some conversations. Let's eat some stuff. And let's hang out. Okay, there are people in this room all over the spectrum. And you need to know that wherever you are right now, Jesus is inviting you to come just as you are. Like you don't need to change anything. You don't need to promise anything. You don't need to fix anything before you come. You just need to follow. You just need to start following. And if this is new for you, and maybe you want to know, well, okay, but what will that entail? Like, what will that mean for me? I think Jesus would say the same thing to you that he said to other people all throughout the scriptures. Just come and see. Just come and see. But for now, you do what you can do. You follow. Okay, observation number 2. Being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. What? Being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. None of Jesus' earliest followers believed. That can't be. No, it's true. Does that sound crazy? It's not. Because maybe you'd say, well, I can't follow Jesus because I'm not even sure what I believe about Jesus. I just want to say, so what? Don't let that stop you. Like none of Jesus' earliest followers believed. None of them were sure what they believed when they started out on this journey with him. None of them. You ever notice it's kind of crazy. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the disciples are like 2 years or so into following Jesus. And then Jesus does something kind of big, and the text will say, and they believed. Well, like what were they doing before that? Not believing. Okay? At least not fully. They were wrestling. They were trying to figure things out. They were open. But they very much did not have it all worked out. They weren't sure what they believed. Okay? But they followed anyway. None of them had it all worked out when they started. If you're waiting to get it all worked out before you start, you will never start. I don't have it all worked out. But as they went along, Jesus just kept revealing stuff to them, and he kept interacting with them, and they started to get to know him, and their belief in him was gradual. And for those of you that don't know my story, I know some of you, you know it makes you want to throw up, but for those of you that don't know my story, I didn't grow up in the church. Okay, and this might be shocking to some of you. I did not come out of the womb a pastor. I know some stuff. I've experienced some life. Okay, and I know what it is to doubt. I know what it is to not believe. And for me, it took me about 3 years of asking questions and wrestling. And it was so gradual for me, to be honest with you, that and this is hard for me in some Christian circles because they always want to know, well, what's the day? What's the time when you became a Christian? And I'm like, man, I don't know. I can tell you 25 years ago, I wasn't. And I will tell you that now, I'm pretty sure I am. But when was the magical moment that happened? It was so gradual. I think, and I'm pretty sure that it happened when I was 20 years old. I can kind of point to the year. But it started for me, really, this whole process started for me when I became willing to start asking some questions. And I was willing to start reading some stuff. And I was willing to go to church sometimes. And I was willing to talk to some Christians that I knew. And that's all that I knew. I didn't know what else to do. I was I'm interested in this. I don't know what else to do. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I did. And Jesus met me there. And thankfully for me, he was so incredibly patient. And for me, the belief part was unbelievably gradual. Being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. The belief comes later. It's part of the process. That's how it works. But you start with what you can do, and you take a step, and you start to follow. Okay, third observation. The invitation is to relationship, not to right beliefs and behaviors. The invitation is to relationship. Like it's just so much deeper and so much richer and so much more mysterious than rules. It is so much more than just beliefs and behaviors. Now, will it include some beliefs and behaviors? Well, of course it will. But those are the byproduct of the relationship. I mean, you think about it like this. If you were married to someone that obeyed like all the marriage rules, and you obeyed all the marriage rules, you still might not have a good relationship. Because I think all of us would prefer to be with someone that maybe breaks some of the rules some of the time, but like there's an actual relationship. Because rules don't make a relationship. In fact, the reason that I sort of keep the marriage rules is because I'm in love with Jen. Like I've never once sort of got up in the morning and pulled out my list and said, okay, Jason, remember today. Here are the 5 things you need to do to be a good husband. And here are the 5 things you must not do if you want to be a good husband. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, we don't even have a list like that. Because I don't need that. You know why? Because I'm in love. And here's what Jesus knew. And I have to warn you, and like, okay, if this is new for you, full disclosure here. If you start loving Jesus, you will eventually do some different things. But it's not because you got up in the morning one day and you reviewed your list and you said, okay, remember, good Christians always, and if I don't do these things, I'm a bad Christian. It's because you're in love. And this is why Jesus could just say to Matthew, follow me. Jesus knew if he says yes, we're going to have a relationship. We're going to love each other. And it's going to change things for him. I mean, you've been in love, right? It changes you. Like when you're in love, you do different things. You stop doing certain things, and you start doing certain things, and you start thinking a different way. And Jesus is saying to every one of us, follow me. Learn to connect to me. Learn to connect the way a branch connects to a vine. And let me pour life into you. I can start healing you. I can start making you whole. But you have to admit that you're sick. You have to actually want something else for your life. And then you just start where you are. You do what you know to do, and you take a step, and you follow. That's it. God, I thank you so much that this really is this simple. And I thank you so much that no matter where we are, no matter what has been going on in our thoughts or our life or all of the years that we've lived up until now, the invitation is the same. For those that have been walking with you, the invitation is the same. Keep following me. For those that don't know you, that this is a brand new thing, the invitation is the same. Follow me. And Jesus, I pray that we would never, never, never take this vibrant, living, mysterious relationship with you and trade it out to play the game of Jesus says. Help us to know you. Help us to walk with you. And I pray that as we do what we know to do, as we take the only steps we know to take, that you would meet us there and you would show us what steps to take next. And you would send us on a journey that would change us, that would heal us, that would make us whole, that would enable us to love you and be loved by you. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your kindness. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.